Hey everyone, in this book, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Chris Whipple brings us along for an immersive journey through the turbulent events that unfolded around Washington, D.C., in the final year of the Civil War. Through vivid descriptions and captivating storytelling, he transports us back to a time when the nation was on the brink of collapse and the capital city was under constant threat from Confederate forces. As the war raged on, the streets of Washington became a battleground where Union and Confederate soldiers clashed in deadly combat, leaving a trail of destruction and despair in their wake. The 1st North Carolina and other black regiments played a vital role in securing victories that led to the end of slavery and the preservation of the Union, but their contributions were often overlooked and their sacrifices forgotten. But the story of the 1st North Carolina is not just a footnote in history. But little did they know that the man they had placed their trust in was harboring deep resentment towards Lincoln and had a secret plan to undo much of what Lincoln had accomplished. Despite being a slave owner himself, he ultimately came to oppose slavery and worked to abolish it. Similarly, while he was willing to overlook Confederate atrocities and grant amnesty to former Confederates, he was also willing to stand up against racial discrimination and advocate for civil rights. Ultimately, Johnson's story is a reminder of the complexities of history and the need for nuance in our understanding of historical figures. He may have fallen short in some areas, but his contributions in others should also be acknowledged and celebrated. You see, Andrew Johnson had been a slave owner before the war, but he had also been a vocal critic of when Virginia seceded, he refused to leave the Union and was appointed military governor of the state. This move proved to be a turning point in Johnson's career, as it exposed him to the realities of slavery firsthand and caused him to abandon his pro-slavery views. Johnson then went on to become a U.S. Senator representing Tennessee and eventually the vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party in 1864. His selection as Lincoln's running mate was seen as a way to attract pro-slavery Democrats to the ticket and help secure Lincoln's re-election. However, Johnson's loyalty to the Confederacy was a closely guarded secret known only to a few. Once elected, Johnson served as a moderate voice in Lincoln's administration, supporting policies that granted amnesty to Confederate soldiers and allowed Southern states to rejoin the Union with minimal restrictions. He also advocated for racial equality and civil rights for African Americans, which put him at odds with the Confederacy. Nevertheless, Johnson remained loyal to Lincoln until the president's assassination in 1865, at which point he assumed the presidency. Once in office, Johnson wasted no time in dismantling many of Lincoln's accomplishments, including his support for African American civil rights. He vetoed the 14th Amendment, which would have granted citizenship to all persons born in the United States, regardless of race, and supported the exclusion of African Americans from the right to vote. He also opposed the enforcement of the 13th Amendment, which had abolished slavery, by refusing to enforce it in Southern states. Additionally, Johnson implemented a lenient Reconstruction policy towards the Confederacy, granting amnesty to most former Confederate leaders and allowing them to keep their property. He also opposed the expansion of federal power, viewing it as a threat to states' rights and the balance of power between the federal and state governments. Johnson's actions were met with widespread disapproval from Republicans who accused him of betraying Lincoln's legacy and undermining the progress that had been made during the Civil War. They argued that Johnson's policies were not only unjust but also dangerous to the stability of the Union. Ultimately, Johnson's efforts to undermine Lincoln's legacy and Reconstruction policy led to his impeachment by the House of Representatives in 1868. While he was acquitted by the Senate, his political career was effectively over, and he returned to his estate in Tennessee, where he died in 1875. It's a testament to the courage, determination, and resilience of Black Americans in the face of adversity. These men fought for their freedom, for the preservation of the Union, and for the recognition of their equality. Their contributions should be remembered and celebrated, and their legacy should inspire us to continue the fight for justice and equality for all. Meanwhile, the political landscape was just as tumultuous, with President Abraham Lincoln caught in the crosshairs of his own vice president, Andrew Johnson, a man who harbored deep resentment over Lincoln's views on race relations and sought to undermine his authority at every turn. On one hand, the Union had emerged victorious, and slavery had finally been abolished. But in the midst of this joy, there was a dark cloud hanging over the city, for while the war was coming to an end, the threat of violence and death was still very real. At Ford's Theater on April 14, 1860, President Abraham Lincoln and his wife Mary were enjoying a performance of a popular play, when suddenly a gunshot rang out. The president had been shot. As the crowd gasped in shock and horror, Lincoln was rushed to a nearby house where he would later die. The nation was in mourning, but there were questions. Who could have done such a thing? The investigation led to John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor who had strong Confederate ties and was a member of a secret organization called the Sons of Liberty. He had carried out the assassination in a plot that involved several As Booth's gang was hunted down and brought to justice, it became clear that the assassination attempt was not just an isolated act of violence, but part of a larger conspiracy to overthrow the government and restore the Confederacy. The conspirators were put on trial, and most were found guilty. Some argued that they had been driven by desperation and anger over the war and its aftermath. Others claimed that they were innocent and had been framed. But ultimately, their fate was sealed. 4 of the 8 conspirators were hanged, while the remaining 4 received lengthy prison sentences. The assassination of Lincoln was a tragic event that shook the nation to its core, but it also revealed the deep divisions and animosities that had emerged during the Civil War. In the aftermath, the country was left to grapple with the legacy of slavery and the path to reconciliation. But it was also a reminder of the fragility of democracy and the importance of unity and healing. Just when it seemed like the war was finally coming to an end, tragedy struck and Lincoln's life was cut short in an instant by the hand of an assassin. In his place, Johnson took over the presidency and set about undoing many of Lincoln's accomplishments, leaving us to wonder what might have been had Lincoln lived. With the fate of the nation hanging in the balance, the people of Washington found themselves caught in the middle of a web of deceit, betrayal, and unimaginable violence as the war came to a dramatic close. Join us as we delve into the gripping narrative of Midnight on the Potomac, exploring the pivotal moments that shaped the course of history during one of the most tumultuous years in American history. As the Civil War raged on, the streets of Washington, D.C., became a battleground where Union and Confederate soldiers clashed in deadly combat. It was a time when the fate of the nation hung in the balance and the capital city was under constant threat from Confederate forces. But amidst the chaos and destruction, there were those who sought to make a difference. Enter the African-American regiment known as the 1st North Carolina, also known as the 1st Regiment of the United States Colored Troops. These brave men had enlisted in the Union Army in 1863, eager to fight for their freedom and the preservation of the Union. But they faced fierce opposition from the racist attitudes of their white counterparts, who believed that black soldiers were inferior and should be relegated to support roles rather than being allowed to engage in combat. Despite these challenges, the 1st North Carolina fought valiantly, proving their bravery and skill in battle. One such battle was the Battle of Olney's Creek, which took place in June 1864. The regiment was tasked with capturing a Confederate supply depot, but they were met with fierce resistance from a force nearly twice their size. Undeterred, the 1st North Carolina charged forward, engaging the enemy in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. The casualties were heavy, but the regiment held their ground, eventually forcing the Confederates to retreat. The victory at Olney's Creek was a testament to the courage and determination of the 1st North Carolina, but it was far from their only accomplishment. Throughout the war, they continued to fight for the Union, proving themselves to be an invaluable asset to the Army. But sadly, despite their contributions, the 1st North Carolina and other black regiments were often treated as second-class citizens within the military. They faced discrimination, low pay, and a lack of supplies, which made their accomplishments even more remarkable. Meanwhile, as the war drew to a close, the fate of the nation hung in the balance. As the Civil War drew to a close, the streets of Washington, D.C., became a scene of both triumph and tragedy. And in the aftermath of this national tragedy, the nation turned to Vice President Andrew Johnson to lead them through this difficult time. As we reflect on Andrew Johnson's complex legacy, it is important to remember that he was a product of his time and the contradictions of his era. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.